It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. An end to the destruction, at least for now. But hours before a Gaza ceasefire takes effect, Benjamin Netanyahu warns it may not be permanent.
We maintain our right to resume the war, if necessary, with the backing of the U.S.
In Israel's hostages square, the wait to see just who will come home after more than 450 days in captivity. And the Palestinian man whose teenage son is imprisoned after a Facebook post tells us of his hopes for a prisoner release. Also ahead, several people are seriously injured in a chairlift accident at a Spanish ski resort. Thousands protest in Washington against Donald Trump as he heads to the American Capitol for his second inauguration. Plus, with Trump's return to power imminent, Sky News is given access to the Ukrainian drone operators, unsure how much longer they'll be fighting. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. Even tonight, Palestinians and Israelis will be taking nothing for granted. But if there are no last-minute hitches, a ceasefire in Gaza is now just 8.5 hours away. It should see the release of the first 3 hostages taken by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023, with a further 30 due to be freed in the first phase of the ceasefire. In return, dozens of Palestinian prisoners will be freed from Israeli jails. But as the Israeli Prime Minister made his first televised statement since the ceasefire was agreed, he warned that his country reserves the right to attack Hamas again. Our first report tonight is from our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, and just a warning that it does contain images of bodies in body bags.
Whilst they wait for the ceasefire, the bombing has been relentless. This is the aftermath of an attack in southern Gaza, where the displaced had been living in tents. They thought this was a safe area, but the war still came, killing and causing casualties. People here have lost so much, the grief never stops.
May God give his father in particular the patience. He lost a son at the beginning of the war when an apartment building collapsed on him. His son Samir became a martyr, and today he lost his eldest as well.
The horror of what has happened in Gaza is beyond words. Tens of thousands of people have been killed in this war. Whole neighborhoods have been obliterated. The skyline is scarred with broken buildings from the endless fighting.
You can see the smoke behind me from another strike, but when the ceasefire starts, the bombs will stop dropping and the guns will fall silent after 15 long and brutal months of war. But there are still many questions about what will happen in the days and weeks ahead. Many issues still need to be resolved, not least of all, who will run the Gaza Strip? And until that happens, there can be no permanent end to the violence.
The Palestinian Authority says it is ready to take control, but Israel has stated that would be unacceptable. It is issues like this which make the deal so fragile. And the Israeli Prime Minister is warning the war will restart if the negotiations falter.
If we need to resume combat, we will do so in new ways, and we will do so with tremendous force. During the negotiations, I set some basic principles, some ground rules. The first principle is maintaining the ability to resume fighting in case it's necessary.
In Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where they've held weekly protests, they staged yet another rally. People are worried that the deal may still crumble. Shai Moses' uncle, Gadi, was kidnapped on October the 7th. He hopes they will be reunited soon.
If we understand correctly, Gadi is supposed to be released on the 3rd or the 4th week of this phase. We hope very much he's still alive.
In the first phase of the deal, 33 of the hostages should be returned to their loved ones. But the fear is if the fighting starts again, not everyone will be coming home. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Tel Aviv.
Well, Alex just mentioned the 33 Israeli hostages expected to be released during the first phase of the ceasefire. These are their faces. Ofer Calderon was taken along with his two children, Erez and Sahar. Both children were released in November 2023. Two of his other family members were killed in the initial attack. 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz is one of the oldest hostages in captivity. He and his wife had been working to provide medical care to Palestinians in Gaza. Mr. Lifshitz was taken during an attack that saw 46 others killed. Nama Levy had just begun her military service when she was taken by Hamas. The 20-year-old was filmed being bundled into a jeep, her hands tied behind her back. And Doron Steinbrecher is a veterinary nurse who was in her apartment when Hamas attacked. Her last voice message she sent to friends was, "They've arrived, they have me." Well, meanwhile, Palestinian families have been hearing whether their relatives are on a list of 735 prisoners who will be handed over as part of the initial phase of the deal. A further 1,067 taken from Gaza since October the 7th are expected to be freed from Israeli prisons, but have not yet been named. My colleague Anna Botting reports now from Bethlehem, where she witnessed how today's news was received.
Hello.
These are men in demand. Names on a just-published list are pored over by the Palestinian Prisoners Society. The phone has not stopped ringing, families desperate for news.
Yes. Nice to meet you, Abdallah Zigari.
Cases here carefully catalogued. 10,400 Palestinians from the West Bank and East Jerusalem are currently in Israeli detention. The total number taken from Gaza, though, is unknown.
This is the biggest challenge for us. We receive calls from the families from Gaza since the beginning of the war. They don't know any information about their people who were arrested from the Israeli occupation in Gaza. Maybe they killed. Maybe they are in secret jails.
Before October the 7th, the biggest ever prisoner exchange was the release of Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in 2011, held by Hamas in Gaza for 5 years. More than 1,000 Palestinians were freed, among them, after 22 years in jail, Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza, widely seen as the architect of October the 7th. He was killed in October last year in Rafah. Across Bethlehem, one family with 3 generations who have experienced Israeli jails. Grandfather, father, and now missing their eldest son. It was at 2 in the morning last September, Firas Hassan tells me, that his son Ahmed was dragged from his bed. He was 16. He'd posted anti-Israeli comments on Facebook. He is now in Offa prison, but is not on this first list to be freed.
I miss him a lot, and I am afraid for him because of what happens in Israeli jails.
The day of release for Firas himself last April, 2 years in jail with no charges this time. He says he was beaten in prison. He'd been arrested at a checkpoint in his car. As a young man, he said he had been a member of the political wing of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but no more. He spent 15 years in prison in total.
Before the 7th of October, the situation was stable. After that, everything turned upside down. It was horrible, crazy, scary. The beatings, starvation, and decreasing the amount of food compared to before 7th of October.
A family now hoping the ceasefire deal will hold long enough to see their son return home. Anna Botting, Sky News, Bethlehem.
Let's go back now to our international correspondent, Alex Rossi. And Alex, it must be an anxious wait for the families of hostages and, of course, for the people of Gaza.
Yeah, I think on both sides of the equation, it is an extraordinarily anxious and nervous wait. Many people here in Israel and, of course, in Gaza can't believe that this ceasefire is finally about to happen. Many people, of course, asking the question, why couldn't it have happened much earlier? People pointing out that the deal on the table, the deal that has now been ratified by the Israeli government, looks very much like the one that was presented by Joe Biden back in late May. But having said that, people are not taking anything for granted, even at this late stage. In Hostages Square, where I've just come from, people are really kind of holding their breath. They're still not really believing it's going to happen until it happens. And then, of course, there is going to be the drip release of hostages. Only 3 we are expecting tomorrow. In Gaza, of course, after this very long and brutal war, they are just hoping for some respite from the bombing and hoping, of course, that this will eventually lead to a more permanent ceasefire.
Alex Rossi in Jerusalem. Alex, thank you. And we will, of course, have full coverage of the implementation of the ceasefire from 6 a.m. tomorrow. Now, Donald Trump is about to take off right now. He is flying to Washington from Florida ahead, of course, of his second inauguration on Monday. But while that moment will now take place indoors because of the extreme weather that's been forecast, thousands took to the streets of the nation's capital today to protest against Mr. Trump's return. Our international correspondent, Diana Magnay, was there.
We will not go back. We will not go back.
The banners are inventive, a smorgasbord of pleas and insults for the man soon to be president. Con man. Regulate guns, not women. The People's March, this was called. The people who didn't vote for him and who are scared what the next 4 years will bring.
I am unapologetically queer. I'm unapologetically a woman. I want to be free. I don't want to just stay there and be silent and get all my rights taken away by someone who doesn't even know how to talk.
Tell me about that. First convicted felon to be president of the United States.
First convicted felon. It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment. We also put Elon because you can't spell felon without Elon, right?
They've moved on from the old phrases. It's not just about fighting the patriarchy. It's about fighting the oligarchy, an echo of President Biden's parting words. Defending the climate, safeguarding democracy, threatened these people feel by Trump and his cabinet picks.
We will not go back.
What about Pam Bondi? Do you think she'd make an appropriate attorney general? What do you make of her?
I think all she's there for is to say yes to whatever he asks her to do.
So what do you think about Pete Hegseth then?
I think he's an embarrassment and an embarrassment to the nation.
Trump supporters, any of the thousands who'd made the trip to the Capitol, perhaps now nursing their disappointment not to be witnessing the inauguration. They kept their distance from this crowd. The National Mall is much livelier than it'll likely be on Monday. Now the inauguration has moved indoors, but it's still nowhere near the 500,000 who came out onto the streets of Washington, D.C. 8 years ago to protest against Donald Trump's first term. And there's a mood now of resignation, a recognition, if you will, that Trump is back. There's not much that they can do about it.
We tell the truth. We rally the people. We don't ever give up, even when it seems impossible.
Tamika Middleton helped organize the Women's March 8 years ago, and this one too. Do you think he's listening? Do you think he cares that there are thousands of people out in D.C. today protesting against him?
I mean, our audience is never Donald Trump. I think he pays attention because he wants to compare, you know, the ego of it all. But our audience, our target audience, is everyday folks who are looking for something to believe in, who are looking for people to connect to.
But for all the protest banners in the Capitol, this is Donald Trump's moment, secured by the electoral and the people's vote. The halls of power now his for the taking.
And Diana joins us live now from Washington. And Diana, just a few seconds ago, we could see on the side panel that Donald Trump has taken off from Florida, now on his way to Washington, D.C. So as we saw in your report, not everybody likes him, but he is going to be sworn back into office in around 48 hours.
He is, and that flight that he's making to Washington now is the start of a few days of grand celebration, really, ahead of the inauguration this very solemn ritual around the peaceful transfer of power, a transfer of power that he tried to disrupt 4 years ago on January the 6th. But he is flying to Joint Base Andrews, a military base just outside of Washington. He has an event at the Trump National Golf Club tonight, various events, a victory rally tomorrow, and then, of course, the inauguration on Monday. And I think the pictures that you saw just now of those protesters on the streets cannot be taken in isolation. Donald Trump arrives in Washington with corporate America in the palm of his hand. He has Middle East peace, which he will lay claim for himself. His legal cases are behind him. I think that for all the protest voices that you hear today, he enters the presidency with a very, very strong hand. What happens over the next 4 years may be a very different story, but for now, he is sitting very pretty.
With the latest there from Washington, D.C., Diana, thank you. Well, let's go to today's other news now. And several people have been injured after a chairlift collapsed at a ski resort in northern Spain. It happened at Astún on the border with France in the Pyrenees mountain range. A statement tonight from the resort said 15 people had been injured, 3 of them seriously. Amelia Harper reports.
Against a backdrop of an outgoing helicopter, these skiers are trapped on a chairlift. Firefighters working to free them, themselves suspended from the cabling. This, the aftermath of a ski lift collapse at the Spanish Astún ski resort. And from underneath, the chairs kept swinging. Skiers gathered on the slope, some left lying on the floor. Dozens of people were injured, some taken to hospital in helicopters. This, their rescuers' view, watched on by those unaffected and uninjured.
It was a very scary moment. Suddenly, it was in a matter of seconds, the ski lift started to fall like in a free fall. We feel now very lucky because we were one of the skiers who just got the ski lift like seconds away, so we were still going up. And but it suddenly looks like the cable lost intensity, so it started to, at the same time, all the tiers in the lift started to fall.
As these rescuers reached the summit, the Spanish Red Cross deployed advanced ambulances and specialised vehicles to the slope. The scale of the challenge seen from the air, trying to reach the around 80 people stranded in the immediate aftermath. The cause of the collapse not yet known. Reacting, the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said he was shocked by the news of the accident at the Astún station. I've spoken to the President of Aragon, Jorge Azcón, to offer him the full support of the government. All our affection to the injured and their families. And as they receive treatment, questions will be asked about how this happened. A family day on the slopes, ending in disaster. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
With Donald Trump about to return to the White House, vowing to stop the war in Ukraine, there's no certainty over what comes next. But for the time being, at least, the Ukrainian military is continuing to fight back against Russia as best it can. Our security and defense editor, Deborah Haynes, gained access to a team of drone operators launching offensives from eastern Ukraine. Here's her report.
The drone operators work fast. Russian eyes are also in the sky, so it's not safe out here. This kind of Ukrainian drone is said to be particularly feared by the other side. The Marines carefully attach a mortar round.
Yes. We've got to head back now, because they don't want us actually being close when the drone launches, in case the bomb drops off by mistake.
Moments later, they launch their attack. From an underground bunker, the pilot flies the drone towards his target. He drops the mortar, aiming for a Russian trench a few miles away, near the frontline city of Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine. They confirm a hit. The team prepares for more strikes in a relentless, remote battle of innovation and improvisation that's transformed the way militaries fight. But another transformation is coming to Ukraine, with the return of Donald Trump to the White House and his pledge to end Russia's war. The officer says this would be painful if it means giving up territory.
I lost my family, man of my family. I've been very sad, because for what? For what he's dying?
At a drone command centre, troops still spy on Russian positions and call in strikes, despite the uncertainty about the future of this fight. The officer in charge shows us footage of one of his drones taking out a tank earlier in the day. As we talk, another attack plays out in real time on another screen.
I know we can't really show the screens, but just now there's been an explosion there. Is that like just now? What was it?
Yes, this is live. We're actively destroying Russian forces. We continue to engage the enemy, identifying targets and methodically eliminating them.
It makes winning the drone war vital, and makeshift factories like this priceless. Engineers here adapt aircraft to travel further and dodge Russian electronic warfare, which can jam signals and force drones out of the sky.
If you don't want to sacrifice your men, your soldiers, you better make this fight distant.
And Donald Trump is saying that he's going to talk to Vladimir Putin, that he's going to secure an end to the fighting. Like, what's your message to him?
We are fighting mentally between civilization and barbarians, right? Like, you cannot make friends with a shark attacking you. Like, you cannot talk to common sense if the animal wants to kill you. I mean, what skills, what negotiation skills would you apply?
Back in the bunker, they wait to launch another strike. But there's a bigger wait going on too, as Ukraine braces for whatever a second Trump presidency will bring. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Eastern Ukraine.
Well, meanwhile, officials in Kyiv say 3 people have been killed in Russian airstrikes on the capital. Pictures posted on social media by the emergency services showed damaged cars and shattered glass in the street. The Ukrainian Air Force says it destroyed 24 drones and 2 missiles launched by Russia overnight. And Donald Trump has told our partners, NBC News, that he will most likely give TikTok a 90-day reprieve from a potential ban after he enters the White House on Monday. It comes after the app said it could go dark in the U.S. tomorrow, following the Supreme Court's ruling against its bid to avoid a ban. Well, fusion power is, some say, the answer to a limitless low-emissions future. And now research into the technology is about to get a £410 million boost in the UK, as our science and technology editor Tom Clark reports.
Look at that. At the heart of the UK's future fusion reactor will be something closely resembling magic.
This is superconducting magnetic levitation.
The black disc is rare earth barium copper oxide. Cooled with liquid nitrogen to minus 200 degrees, it becomes a superconducting magnet. Put enough current through it, and it's 1 million times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. So what do mega magnets have to do with nuclear fusion? Well, the same process that powers stars like our sun is really hard to do on Earth. One way is using a big donut-shaped machine called a tokamak to get a soup of particles called a plasma hot enough for them to fuse and release energy. Experiments like this have held the plasma for a few seconds, but scientists compare the challenge to holding a jelly in a net, a jelly that's 1 million times hotter than the sun. That's where the magnets come in.
These sort of magnetic field strengths were previously impossible to achieve with superconducting materials. This is why we've got this revolutionary material that's making compact fusion possible.
Here at Tokamak Energy, they're using this tape, which is essentially a scaled-down version of this, to create incredibly powerful magnetic fields and arrange them in a device like this to create effectively a magnetic bottle in which to contain a super hot plasma and do fusion.
This is without doubt the most advanced HDS magnet that has ever been built, and it's going to tell us more than has ever been known about how to build these properly.
The company, a world leader in the technology, has just been shortlisted by the government to help build the spherical tokamak for energy production, or STEP, the UK's bid to harness the power of stars to generate electricity. But fusion is still decades away. There's a cash-strapped government wishing on a star it can't afford.
We know that if we invest in fusion research now, it has an immediate economic payoff in terms of bringing thousands of jobs, new skills creation, the technological spin-offs, and be used for things like superconductors, robotics, medical advances, and attraction investment as well.
But competition is intense. The US, China, and this major international collaboration in France all want to become first in fusion. Keeping up will mean commitment and funding for decades to come. Tom Clark, Sky News, Oxfordshire.
Let's get the latest sport now from Joe at Sky Sports News.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
I often describe youth development as the true 92 club system. It's irrespective of your divisional status. It's truly operating across the Premier League and the EFL, developing players at every level. Some clubs are looking at it from the perspective of trying to develop homegrown players. Other clubs are looking at it to help balance the book. Some clubs operate a player trading model where they're looking to identify that talent that they can develop and then maybe sell on to some of the bigger clubs, but that money can then be reinvested back in the club in order to help keep it sustainable and operating in its local community. So everybody's got different objectives.
10 years in, you had the big review. What about the future plans? What does the next 10 years look like?
The ETRLP very much focused on the holistic development of young players. But what we've done 10 years on with our ETRLP review is recognise that the landscape has changed about how you work with children, how you work with elite youth athletes, regulatory changes in football. And we've updated the ETRLP to elevate and be even more explicit around the importance of the academy being a life-enriching experience for all of our young players. And we have aspirations to create unrivaled development environments in our academies. So they're not just the best environments in football, actually, across all facets of developing young people. And the way that we're doing that is, yes, focusing on elite player development, but also focusing on personal growth. And we really feel that will help us to achieve successful outcomes, both in the quality of players that come through and play in the Premier League, but also the players and the young people that go on to achieve things beyond the pitch. What we also care about is the health of our game, making sure that there is room for all of our clubs at the different levels of the game to have success for them, that we are diverse and inclusive in our environments, in our playing populations, in our workforce. The work continues, and it's something that we're really committed to.
We've seen what happens at Manchester United, a Category 1 academy. 26 clubs operate at this level, typically producing Premier League footballers in an elite environment. Category 2 level academies typically produce Football League players, some who make it to the top level. 22 clubs have this status. Category 3 academies are the most common in English football, run by 39 clubs, predominantly producing Football League players. At this level, producing academy players is critical for some clubs' survival, either to supply the first team or to sell players and reinvest the fees. And not many do this better than Exeter City.
What it costs us to put them on the pitch is sometimes people don't really quite understand that that's a huge advantage. And then, of course, we all know the transfer fees.
Hi guys, it's Ollie here. I just want to say thank you to everyone at Exeter for all you've done for me. There's so many names that I could reel off. I hope you guys are well. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you've done.
So Aaron, how proud are you, personally, and also the club, of the players that you've produced?
I think it's the most rewarding thing. It's why you do the job, and any lad that ends up playing at the highest level they can is success for us. But the likes of, when you see Ollie and Ethan playing international football and excelling and playing in the Premier League, it's amazing, and it's the work of so many different people. We've had some fantastic people at this club over the years.
And on the back of their success, obviously the training ground has developed. And
Sky Business sponsors this report.
And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Yasmin Alibai-Brown and Lucy Beresford. Welcome both. Great to see you. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Mail on Sunday. The headline, Team Trump's revenge on Starmer for meddling in the U.S. election. We'll be right back.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Is it a draw?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the Gaza ceasefire may not be permanent and Israel reserves the right to return to fighting in new, forceful ways. Several people have been seriously injured in a ski lift accident at a resort in northern Spain. And President-elect Donald Trump has left Florida for Washington ahead of his inauguration on Monday. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Yasmin Alibai-Brown, columnist at The Eye, and Lucy Beresford, broadcaster and psychotherapist. But first, let's take a quick look at some of those front pages. Well, The Observer says aid agencies in Gaza are bracing for chaos as thousands of people return home after tomorrow's ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The Express reports on the Shadow Chancellor's claim that Rachel Reeves's policies will push up Britain's borrowing costs by £12 billion. The Mail says Donald Trump's White House team are planning to help Nigel Farage's bid to become Prime Minister. The Mirror says it has a special report on patients being crammed in on trolleys while waiting for A&E treatment as the NHS continues to struggle. The Telegraph leads on the row over the Attorney General's involvement in asylum deals for the Chagos refugees. Nearly 42,000 pupils in England are getting extra time in GCSE and A-level examinations, 4 times as many as a decade ago. That's on the front of the Sunday Times. And we are joined tonight by Yasmin Alibai-Brown and Lucy Beresford. Thank you both so much for being with us on, it has to be said, a really busy weekend of news. And, you know, you can tell by the front pages. 2 stories dominate the inauguration leading up to it, but obviously the ceasefire that should happen about, I think, 8 hours from now, 6:30 UK time. Let's just start with The Observer, because they have an interesting take. As part of the ceasefire agreement, a lot of people in Gaza will be allowed to go back to their homes. You know, northern Gaza, one of those parts that has been almost completely destroyed. So aid agencies really gearing up for that. So Yasmin, let me start with you, both the story, but just generally what you've made of the coverage of the ceasefire.
Well, there is no ceasefire, let me tell you. We've just heard, you've just said what Netanyahu has said. Since announcing the ceasefire to today, over 100 people have been killed, including a young female doctor and her entire family. What's happened so far is not just that people have been killed, the entire fabric of that society has been ripped apart. The artists, the teachers, doctors, surgeons, everybody has, journalists, how many? Over 140?
I think it's more than 200 now.
And you are still getting Netanyahu saying, I'm going to go back and fight. So I have no faith in this ceasefire. And if these people trek home and the devastation, imagine, I mean, Lucy's a psychotherapist, imagine coming home to that. I mean, what does that do to your head? Those who are living.
The trauma of it is really quite powerful. I think the story that the Observer is running with is a very sort of on-the-ground story about what chaos there might actually be in the first few hours and days of this particular ceasefire. But it is a bigger story than just what's going to happen on the ground, because there's so much that's unknown. It's a very fragile deal. It's a very fragile peace that has been won. And that's because you've still got Netanyahu trying to maintain the stability of his cabinet. You've got Hamas, who are also equally divided, the Hamas leaders that are overseas versus the Hamas leaders that are actually on the ground in Gaza. So you've got this very localised story, which the Observer is flagging up, and quite rightly, I think it is going to be chaotic as people seek to go back home. But let's be clear, this is a geopolitical story, and it does feed into the Trump inauguration, which is now, you know, less than 2 days away. And that's because a lot of people are actually saying, we wouldn't be where we are today, we wouldn't be where we are right now at 10:30 at night if it hadn't been Donald Trump saying, if the hostages aren't back by the time I'm in president, you know, all hell will break loose. How much he's been the X factor in all of this remains to be seen.
I mean, Yasmin, you mentioned what Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying, which is also in the Sunday Telegraph. So if you can look at the Sunday Telegraph, it says Netanyahu, he gave his first televised address where he basically said that Israel reserves the right to resume war. He also said, we will achieve all the goals of the war and bring back the hostages. So phase 1, very much a temporary ceasefire, and huge question marks, first of all, about phase 1, which, you know, still hasn't started.
There's no ceasefire. He's not going to allow this to happen. And, you know, I really want the Israeli hostages to come home, for them to get their answers. But I also want us to remember the full story. Hundreds of Palestinians, including children. A doctor disappeared last week. And actually, it was Kit Malthouse, the Tory, who said in Parliament, he's been taken and we know what they will do to him. So the hostage situation isn't a one-way thing here. And I hear nothing about the Palestinian hostages of the Israeli government. We have to be fair to all sides, I think.
Well, there is going to be, Palestinian prisoners will be released in the first phase, 735 at first, then 1,067 still as part of the first phase. Look, that's the plan, and then we'll see what happens on all sides.
There are so many moving parts here, because
Exactly.
actually, when Netanyahu says, one of the first things we wanted to know was, what are the names of the people who are going to be released tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? It's now 10:30 at night in the UK. And if Hamas aren't prepared to do the first thing, the first little piece of the jigsaw that was meant to kind of kickstart a lot of these things, you can understand the hesitancy or the reluctance of someone like Netanyahu, who is having to juggle, as I say, so many people in his cabinet who think he's sold out already, who think that actually, even though, I think there are nearly 75% of people in Israel are fully behind the peace deal in the sense that they want to see the hostages come home. But they're very nervous about the fact the last time that happened in 2011, when we had Gilad Shalit, who was traded. This was a soldier who was kidnapped, and he was traded for over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, one of whom was the architect of the atrocities on October the 7th. So people are incredibly nervous about the different stages, and if the first little bit at the beginning of the first piece of the jigsaw falls away, then everything will start to unravel, and that's really worrying.
You can't just put the blame on Hamas.
Why not?
I would not
Why not?
trust, because I do not trust Netanyahu's intentions. I have no faith in what he says or his inner team. And the idea that he's kind of being held hostage doesn't make sense to me.
But that's the problem. And in a situation like this, all sides almost have to hold their nose and say, we're going to have to do things that we never really wanted to do in order to see the bigger picture. And in a way, sometimes it takes a mediator. And whatever one might think about Donald Trump, he definitely had this one line, which is that if these hostages are not coming home by the time I'm president, I can tell you, there will be all hell let loose. And that is the first thing that we need to see.
Yes, we do have to move on.
They'll come home, but the war will not stop. I'm telling you that. Israel is not going to stop. I'm telling you that. Remember the words.
A cessation of violence, though, certainly at least the aid agencies, want to bring in more aid, medical aid and assistance, and certainly for the people of Gaza, if that stops, it can only be good news. Let's go to another story. We mentioned Donald Trump, of course, the catalyst, some say, for all of this. If we go to The Observer on the front page, Khan warns of march of fascism as Trump takes power again. Lucy, very strong word there, fascism.
Yes, so won't surprise anyone that we don't agree on this story either. I personally think it's very inflammatory language. This is Sadiq Khan, who is, in a way, breaking ranks by actually saying, I think this is going to see a realignment of he's talking about the far right, but I don't know whether some of the people that he's cited would necessarily agree with that. He's observing that certain people like Giorgia Meloni and I think
Eric Zemmour
from France is also going to be at the inauguration.
Yeah. Viktor Orban, I think, from Hungary is going
At the same time, it's very important to remember that certain Viktor Orban and Giorgia Meloni, they are elected leaders of their country. They're not people who suddenly randomly became the head of their country through a coup. And when Sadiq Khan talks about it in this way, I have so much faith in some of the things that he does say. I just wish he didn't feel the need to be this inflammatory, to really talk about people who are the legitimate leaders of their country.
Listen, they are fascists. Meloni is a fascist. Hitler was voted in by the people of Germany. Democracy can produce the most appalling results. So I think we have to be a little bit careful and say just because people were elected, we may not fear them or criticize them. And I really admire Khan, whom I've known for over 35 years. I'm making a declaration here. I knew him before he was a politician. Because there's this sucking up to Trump now, the Emperor Trump. Everybody's kissing his rings, Zuckerberg, all of them are surrendering to this man who is appalling, in my view. And Trump and Khan is having the courage to say what a lot of people in this country are feeling.
We'll move on because then we'll talk about the influence that Trump is having here. Obviously, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, would deny that she is a fascist or that her party is, even though they have roots in neo-fascism. But she has renounced all of that. Let's go now to the Mail on Sunday, and also kind of linked to the front page of the Times. But if you look at the Mail on Sunday, Team Trump's revenge on Starmer for meddling in U.S. election. And I think the Sunday Times, if we can go to that as well, could give us an idea of what some of that meddling could be, because the question there is Mandelson at risk from MAGA? So, Lucy, tie in those stories,
I just
please.
love the fact that this man, Donald Trump, has so much star power that he is literally infiltrating every single story on the front pages. Yes, it's his inauguration, so obviously that's going to be part of the process. But he is part of the Gaza story. He is part of the Israel story, and he's also part of our domestic politics. So the rumour is, and it's tricky because we haven't actually got very much information from the front of the Mail yet. We haven't got the inside pages, but there is apparently some call to not be very flattering to Keir Starmer, to not invite him to be one of the early leaders to come and visit Trump in the same way as, for example, Theresa May was the first overseas leader.
We may not have details from the Mail on Sunday, but we do have an indication from the Sunday Times, the Peter Mandelson story.
Correct.
And here they're saying, and forgive me, Yasmin, maybe you can give me the details, that basically they could block Lord Mandelson as ambassador. Has there ever been a precedent for that?
There's never been a precedent. And the idea that he's got star quality, Lucy, it's Donald Trump you're talking about.
Yes, but this is the point.
No,
this
it's not star.
That actually
it's just
it's the magnetism of power.
His power is brutish power. He doesn't care about the rules. And he thinks he can do this. And I find it funny that they're accusing our country of meddling in US affairs when Musk declared that he was going to unseat our Prime Minister.
So what would do you think it's better that we don't engage with someone like him? Of course you have to engage with him.
I don't think one should fall over. No, we can have relations, but they have to be proper and critical relations. How far would you go? How far would you go in with your compromises? There's got to be some values.
Yasmin, Lucy, forgive me, we're going to have to leave it there. So we'll be discussing it again, but coming up, why a third of students will now get extra time for their exams. That's coming up. Stay with us.
The Premier League is on NBC and Peacock. It's a clash in the capital. Arsenal. Aston Villa. Saturday on NBC and Peacock.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom. But that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything. It's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island. The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
A police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Yasmin Alibai-Brown and Lucy Beresford. Thanks for staying with us. Let's go to the Sunday Times. Not quite exam time right now, but it is an exam story. Third of pupils now get extra time in exams. Lucy, talk me through it. Is this actually when they're sitting the exam?
It is. So we've got Ofcol, which is the exam regulator, and they've identified that nearly a third of pupils are now being given, particularly within the independent sector, are being given this extra time, often up to maybe a quarter of extra time. And that's because these children have cognitive learning disabilities, they might have dyslexia, autism, sensory differences. And what I have to say from a clinical perspective, and I speak now on behalf of many of my colleagues, we, maybe 20 years ago, we might have seen maybe one person under the age of 16 with an attention deficit disorder diagnosis, maybe once a month. Now we seem to be getting about 5 a day.
And why do you
So
think that
what
is?
is that? Is it because suddenly we're becoming much slicker at diagnosing these people? Or do we have a lot of parents who've worked out that this is the way to get their children to have more time in exams? So I simply put it out there that there seems to be an extraordinary ability for a certain cohort of people to be able to say, my child is really needing this extra support, and as a result, please could you write a note so that they can get more time in exams? And I think it's very worrying, because what we're in danger of doing, and this kind of leads into something that Tony Blair was talking about last week, and he got a lot of criticism for talking specifically about mental health. But I think we're in grave danger of pathologising a lot of behaviour that children have that's actually very natural for childhood and adolescence.
Yasmin, what do you think?
No, I don't know enough about it, but I think Lucy's put it very well. But I do think that we've always had this facility. And what I think we also have to admit that our children, there have been world studies on happiness in children, and British children come out near the bottom. And we need to find out why. And I don't think it's because we're spoiling them too much. There's something, and we're not the only ones. There are other societies where unhappiness among young people and children is going up. And we need to explore that. And I think it might be
media, is that part of it?
The social media might be a lot to do with it, but I also think, I don't know, broken families, sense of feeling doom and gloom everywhere. I just don't know. But we should be concerned that countries in Africa have children who are happier than ours.
I thought the brave attempt by the Australian government to ban phones for all kids under the age of 16 was really, really
I think they've banned
impressive.
social media, haven't they, for kids under 16?
That's right, but in many ways, many of these children won't be using their phones for anything else. They don't actually use them to make a call. So I think we're being realistic here. What the Australian government are trying to do is to say, can we give our children their childhoods back?
Yeah. On a final story, front page of the Sunday Times again. This is about Harry, Prince Harry, of course. He's got a new podcast. Yasmin, what's this new podcast?
Well,
or he's going to have a new podcast?
He's working for his living. He's no longer dependent on our money. And they do all sorts of things which people of his class do, which is...
It's quite a headline, though. Why is it Harry's Sociopath
I think they
podcast?
always want to malign this man and his wife. He's apparently pitched, he's only just pitched an idea to do a podcast interviewing big, powerful men. That's all it is.
Including Mark ... I'd love to know which Mark it is.
We'll find out on page 3.
And we'll be getting a lot of this Harry slating because he's in town. And now, you know, we're going to have this Hate Harry.
I mean, let's be clear, everybody, their world and their wife, including me, has a podcast. So I don't see why Harry shouldn't jump on the bandwagon. But it's the fact that they were actually getting $20 million for their podcast.
Well, if they earn it and they get it, it's not taken from you or me.
It's not going to be better than my podcast, Yasmin, and I'm not getting $20 million.
You should call your agent.
Exactly. Sociopath idea.
Lucy, Yasmin, we're going to have to leave it there, but I will see you both in the next hour. Thank you so much. And now let's take a look at the weather. Well, it remains very quiet and cold for the next couple of days, but temperatures will begin to recover ahead of more unsettled conditions later in the week. England and Wales will have a chilly, dull start to the day with some light drizzle or snow grains in the south. Patchy freezing fog will form through central areas where the cloud breaks for any length of time. Skies will be clearer over northern England and Scotland with some brightness after a frosty start. It will be milder and cloudier in the west with some patchy rain and fresher winds. This rain belt will edge east through the day as a weakening feature. And coming up next on Sky News at 11. With just hours to go until a ceasefire takes effect in Gaza, the Israeli Prime Minister insists Israel reserves the right to return to fighting.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.